If you saw them on the street, you wouldn't stop. Just an old black couple, hands intertwined, walking slow, nothing flashy, nothing loud. But what no one saw, what no one could possibly see, was the fire of a lifetime of dignity burning quietly behind their wrinkled smiles. The morning sun poured into the small, tidy kitchen of a modest single-story home, nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. The clinking of a spoon against a ceramic teacup echoed softly as James, a tall, elderly black man with a silver beard and warm, thoughtful eyes, stirred his tea. Across the table sat his wife, Lillian, her hands folded gracefully in her lap, a soft smile dancing on her lips. She wore a pale blue dress that had once been her Sunday best, now a little faded from the years, but still lovingly pressed. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a careful bun, every strand in place. There was a sparkle in her eyes today, half excitement, half nerves. "Do you think it'll be too much?" she asked, brushing an invisible wrinkle from James's shirt. James looked up, amused. "Too much? For what?" "We're just looking." Lillian chuckled, a small, gentle sound. "Yes, but it's not every day we walk into a place where cars cost more than our entire neighborhood." James paused, then smiled tenderly. "It's just a car, Lil. We've earned this moment. 47 years of hard work, raising 3 kids, skipping vacations, cooking at home instead of eating out. All those years weren't for nothing." Lillian nodded, emotion building behind her careful expression. "You really want to get it today?" "No," he said softly. "I want you to see it, to sit in it, to feel what you deserve, if nothing else." They sat in silence for a few seconds, the kind only people who've been through storms together can sit in comfortably, the kind that says everything without words. Outside, an old Ford truck waited in the driveway, washed and gleaming, like it knew today was special. James held the door for Lillian as she stepped out into the morning light, her hand nestled into his arm like it had been doing for half a century. As they drove through the city, the skyline rising in the distance, Lillian gazed out the window. "You remember when we used to take the bus everywhere?" she asked, smiling faintly. James laughed. "And walk 6 blocks after that. You used to complain about your heels." "Still do," she smirked. "But you always carried me when I pretended to twist my ankle." He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "And I'd do it again." The dealership came into view like a shimmering palace of wealth and power. It sat on the corner of 2 bustling streets, windows glinting in the sunlight, a fleet of luxury cars parked like royalty, waiting to be chosen. James parked across the street, shut off the truck, and sat in stillness for a moment. Lillian noticed the way his fingers tightened around the steering wheel, not with anger, but anticipation, and maybe a little fear. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, but didn't speak right away. Then, "I've faced a lot in my life, Lil, but sometimes, these places, they make you feel like you don't belong, like no matter how good you've been, how much you've done, you'll always be seen a certain way." She leaned over and kissed his cheek gently. "We belong anywhere we choose to be." James smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "That's why I married you." They stepped out of the truck, the midday sun warm on their skin. Holding hands, they walked toward the dealership's grand glass doors. The moment they entered, the temperature in the room didn't drop, but the atmosphere did. Conversations paused, heads turned, laughter stilled. Lillian instinctively drew closer to James. The sleek showroom sparkled with chandeliers and polished marble floors. Cars that looked like they belonged in movies stood like sculptures on velvet platforms, and in the middle of it all, they stood, 2 elderly black people dressed in simple clothes, their presence unexpected in a space built for extravagance. but they stood tall, because they had come not to impress, but to witness a dream, and neither of them knew that this dream would soon be twisted, tested, and eventually reborn in a way that would shake everyone in that building, and beyond, to their core. Sometimes the sharpest blades are made not of steel, but of words wrapped in a smile. As James gently pushed open the grand glass doors of the luxury dealership, they slid aside with a soft mechanical hiss, welcoming him and Lillian into a world that glimmered like a castle of dreams. But the warmth they expected never came. Instead, the moment they stepped inside, the air thickened, like walking into an invisible wall, made of judgment. The floor beneath their feet was a flawless sea of white marble, polished so smooth it reflected their shoes. Above them, crystal chandeliers shimmered like frozen stars. Cars, sleek, opulent, and otherworldly, stood on display, each one exuding a silent, arrogant beauty. And yet, all that brilliance dimmed under the harsh spotlight of cold eyes. The staff and customers scattered across the showroom paused mid-conversation, their laughter fading into an awkward hush. Every head slowly turned. A young woman in designer heels lowered her Gucci sunglasses and peered at them as if a gust of wind had blown in something out of place. Lillian instinctively squeezed James's arm. He smiled softly at her, a private reassurance, but even he could feel it. Every glance was a scalpel. They had walked in carrying only curiosity and dreams, but now, they carried the weight of every stare, every unspoken question echoing off the polished glass walls. What are they doing here? Did they get lost? Are they seriously shopping? James and Lillian moved gently between the rows of cars, careful not to brush against anything. They admired a navy blue Bentley from a distance, too afraid to lean in, not because they couldn't afford it, but because they already sensed how unwanted they were. James, Lillian whispered, her voice low and trembling. I don't feel right about this. He gently patted her hand. We haven't done anything wrong. Just breathe. We're only looking. But he knew. He felt it too. The pressure of centuries of assumptions, pressing down like invisible hands. Then came the footsteps, sharp, deliberate, echoing across the floor. Click. Click, click. A tall man in a tailored black suit approached, his leather shoes clicking against the marble like slow applause. His blonde hair was slicked back to perfection. His jawline could cut glass, but his eyes, easy blue, were colder than the cars he sold. His name tag read, John Williams, Senior Executive Sales Associate. He stopped a few feet from them, deliberately keeping his distance, and then, with the most polished smile that ever disguised a sneer, he spoke. Well, good morning, he said, voice sweet as venom. I believe there's been some sort of misunderstanding. James blinked. I'm sorry. John tilted his head, pretending confusion. This dealership, our cars start at over $500,000. They're a bit exclusive. Lillian's hand froze on her purse strap. We're aware, James replied calmly. We're just here to look. Right, of course. John chuckled, an insincere, condescending sound that curdled the air. It's just people like you don't usually shop here. He didn't need to say the words out loud. People like you. The silence filled in the blanks. Their skin, their clothes, their age, everything about them had already been judged, sized, and discarded. Behind John, a cluster of employees and a couple of customers tried, poorly, to stifle their laughter. One woman actually turned her back to hide the smirk blooming across her face. Lillian felt her chest tighten. She gripped James's arm harder, her throat stinging, the sting of embarrassment, of being seen, and instantly dismissed. James met John's eyes with quiet fire. We're not trespassing. We're customers. Or is that not allowed? John shrugged, folding his arms across his chest, unconcerned. You're welcome to look, of course, just, maybe not too close. These cars aren't for everyone, you know. A storm of laughter erupted from a nearby desk. It was muffled, but loud enough. Lillian's composure broke. Tears welled at the edges of her eyes, not from weakness, but from the pure exhaustion of a lifetime of moments like these. "I think, maybe we should go," she whispered, her voice cracking. "No," James said gently, but firmly. "We'll leave when we're ready." He turned to John one last time. "You don't get to decide what we're worth." But John was already walking away, tossing over his shoulder with a smile. "Of course not. Enjoy the showroom." It was a dismissal, one dressed in politeness, but rotten underneath. The couple stood in silence for a moment. Around them, conversations resumed, but the tone had shifted. Whispers filled the air like a smoke no one wanted to admit breathing. From the far side of the showroom, Emily Torres, a young Latina sales associate, froze mid-step. She had witnessed the entire exchange. Her heart burned with disbelief and fury. She took one step forward, but stopped. Her manager was watching. Her hands clenched, the papers in her grip. She wanted to scream, to call John out in front of everyone, but her feet felt like lead. Before she could move again, James turned to Lillian and gently guided her toward the door. Not a word, no confrontation, no scene. Just a slow, quiet exit under the invisible spotlight of humiliation. As the glass doors slid shut behind them, the sound felt final, like something sacred had been broken. Outside, the couple stood on the sidewalk, frozen under the bright afternoon sun. Lillian trembled, tears falling now, leaving silver trails down her cheeks. James placed his hand over hers. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. We shouldn't have come." "No," she whispered, voice shaking. "We should have. We just didn't expect the world to still be so cruel." She turned for one last look through the dealership glass. Inside, she caught Emily's eyes. The young woman's expression was full of helplessness. Her lips parted with unsaid words, and in that brief glance, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. They turned and walked away, blending into the crowd. Just another old couple moving through the city. But inside their hearts, a wound had been reopened, and it would take more than time to heal it. Emily Torres stood frozen, her fingers clutching a leather-bound portfolio, so tightly the edges began to crumple. Her chest rose and fell in short, shallow breaths as the glass door slid shut behind the elderly couple. She had watched the entire thing, from the sharp cruelty in John Williams' voice to the silent agony etched across the woman's trembling lips. And now, they were gone, just like that, like dust swept under a rug of polished smiles and marble floors. The claps of high heels, the chuckles, the smug side eyes, all of it was still happening around her, as if nothing had happened, as if dignity hadn't just been crushed in broad daylight. Emily's heels echoed faintly as she took a single step forward, her lips parted, trembling with words she hadn't yet gathered. Her heart thundered against her ribs, not from fear of confrontation, but from the ache of injustice. Why didn't I move sooner? Why didn't I say something? 1,000 scenarios spun in her mind of what she could have done, should have done, but shame had kept her still, and that was the part that stung the most. John walked past her, adjusting his cufflinks with the arrogance of a man who thought he had won. "Some people just don't know where they belong," he muttered under his breath, smiling at himself, as if he'd just delivered a punchline. Emily stared at him, every word he'd spoken to the couple still ringing in her head. "People like you. This place isn't for you. Don't get too close." She could still see the way the old man held his wife's hand, not to guide her, but to protect her from breaking. She remembered the woman's eyes, trying not to cry in front of strangers who found their pain entertaining. Something inside Emily snapped. She turned, ignoring her pounding heart, and stormed past the front desk toward the exit. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say. She didn't even know if they'd still be there. All she knew was that she had to do something. Now, outside, James and Lillian stood at the bottom of the dealership steps, huddled in a small pocket of shade. The world continued to buzz around them, cars honking, passers-by chatting, but they stood still,
isolated in their own sorrow. Lillian wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "I shouldn't have worn this old dress," she said softly. "I should have." James shook his head gently. "It wasn't the dress, Lil. It's never been the dress." They stood in silence, carrying the invisible weight of centuries-old judgment. Then they heard the door open behind them. "Excuse me," a voice called, soft but urgent. They turned slowly. There she was, Emily Torres, still in her crisp blazer, her brown eyes shining with emotion. As she descended the steps toward them, James instinctively stepped in front of Lillian, unsure of what to expect. Emily's voice cracked as she spoke, her chest tight with guilt. "Please wait a moment." The couple paused. James tilted his head slightly, eyes cautious. Emily stopped in front of them, breathless but composed, her words pouring out like a confession. "I'm so sorry. What happened inside? Those words, that treatment, they don't represent all of us." Lillian blinked, stunned by the sincerity in the young woman's tone. "I was inside. I saw everything," Emily continued, her voice shaking. "And I didn't speak up when I should have. I stood there. I watched, and that's something I'll regret for a long time, unless you give me the chance to make it right." James's features softened just slightly, surprised by her boldness. "I know it won't undo what happened," Emily said, stepping closer. "But I want to. I need to, even if just for a moment. Will you come back inside? Let me show you the car properly, not because of what anyone else thinks, but because you deserve it." Lillian glanced at James, searching his eyes. He gave a tiny nod, and for the first time that day, a fragile smile returned to her face. "Yes," she said quietly. "We'll come back for a moment." Inside the dealership, the temperature didn't change, but something in the atmosphere cracked. As Emily stepped back in with the elderly couple at her side, heads turned again, but this time, differently, not in mockery, not in disdain, in confusion, in shame. Emily walked taller now, not with arrogance, but with purpose. She led James and Lillian past the same people who had mocked them earlier, past the same car they had been told they couldn't afford. She stopped beside a sleek black Rolls-Royce, its curves shining like obsidian under the light. She gently touched the door handle, her voice warm and proud. "This," she said softly, "is the car you asked about yesterday. It's handcrafted, powerful, elegant, but the best part, it's designed to make every journey feel like home." James and Lillian stood in silence, letting the moment wash over them. For the first time, no one was laughing, no one was whispering. The scornful looks had been replaced with lowered eyes and uncomfortable frowns. Emily opened the door with care, holding it like it was sacred. "Please, step inside. Take a seat." Lillian hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto the luxurious leather seat. She exhaled, softly, shakily, her eyes misting as her fingers brushed against the polished wood trim. James followed, taking the driver's side. His hands gently gripped the steering wheel. He closed his eyes, and for the first time that day, he didn't feel judged. He felt seen. Emily knelt beside them, her voice tender. "You didn't deserve what happened earlier, and I can't promise this dealership will change overnight, but I can promise you this. I see you, and I will remember this moment, always." James turned to her, eyes heavy, but grateful. "Thank you, dear, not for the car, but for the kindness." And just like that, a single voice, once afraid to speak, had broken the silence. What Emily didn't know in that moment was that her quiet act of courage would ripple far beyond those glass walls. It would be the first spark in a fire that would blaze through the heart of injustice, and the world would soon know that kindness, especially the kind that shows up when it's hardest to give, is the strongest power of all. The sky was painted in deep orange and bruised purple, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the grand stone driveway of a luxurious estate. Inside, the soft golden lights of the Holloway residence flickered to life, warm, elegant, and timeless. The home belonged to Michael Holloway, the youngest black CEO in the history of his industry. a man known in boardrooms and business journals for his sharp mind, unshakable confidence, and quiet charisma. But tonight, the halls of his mansion carried an unusual stillness. In the formal dining room, the rich aroma of home-cooked oxtail stew and honey-glazed carrots lingered in the air. The silver cutlery lay perfectly arranged, the linen napkins folded just so. It was the kind of table set for conversation, laughter, and warmth. But none of that came. James and Lillian, usually the light of these gatherings, sat across from each other quietly. The smiles they wore, earlier now, hollow reflections of habit. Their forks clinked against the porcelain plates, but the food barely moved. Their postures were polite, composed, but weighed down. Across the table, Michael watched them with quiet concern. He was used to his parents chatting non-stop about gardening, the neighbors, or some old TV show they'd re-watched for the 5th time. But tonight, nothing. No teasing from his mom, no dad humming old jazz tunes between bites, just the soft ticking of the wall clock, and the crackle of a candle burning low. Michael set down his fork. "Okay," he said gently, leaning forward. "What's going on?" James looked up first, his eyes tired. "What do you mean? You've barely touched your food." Mom hasn't laughed once. "And every time I ask how your day was, you both say fine like you don't mean it." He gave a slight smile. "Talk to me, please." Lillian's hand twitched as she lowered her foot, her eyes darting to her husband, silently asking, "Do we tell him?" James sighed, brushing his thumb over the edge of the tablecloth. Then slowly, he nodded. And just like that, the dam broke. Lillian's voice came out low, like a melody soaked in sorrow. "We went to that dealership downtown today. The one near the fountain." Michael's eyebrows lifted. "Oh right, the one with the showroom full of luxury imports. I thought you were just browsing for fun." "We were," James said. "That's all we wanted, just to look." Lillian's voice trembled. "But they didn't even see us as people." Michael sat back, eyes narrowing. James cleared his throat, trying to keep composure. "We walked in, and everything stopped, like we were ghosts. They looked at our clothes, our skin, and decided right away that we didn't belong." Lillian added softly. "They laughed, right in front of us." A heavy silence fell again. This one different, thicker, angrier. Michael's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. "They what?" James shook his head. "It wasn't just the laughter, it was the look. You know the one. That look that says, you don't deserve to be here. Like we were intruding on some sacred ground." Lillian's voice broke as she continued. "They told us, people like you can't afford these cars." Michael sat up straighter, every trace of softness vanishing from his face. His jaw clenched, and a muscle twitched near his temple. "You mean," he said slowly, "they actually said that?" James nodded, not even subtle, clear as day. To our faces. Lillian looked down at her plate, voice barely a whisper. "I wanted to leave. I felt so small." Michael's breath caught. He had seen his mother survive illness, seen her pull double shifts to send him to college. He had seen her laugh in hospital rooms, and sing through sorrow. But he had never seen her describe herself as small, and that shattered something inside him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I wish I'd been there." James reached over and placed a hand on Michael's. "Son, we didn't tell you to make you feel guilty. We just needed someone to know." "No," Michael said, voice steady, but ice cold underneath. "You needed someone to do something." The couple looked at him, eyes full of quiet surprise. Michael stood, the chair sliding back on the polished wood with a soft scrape. He walked over to the tall windows that overlooked the city lights, his silhouette reflected in the glass. Then he turned. "What they did to you, that wasn't just disrespect. That was violence dressed in silk, and they've probably done it before. They'll do it again, but not if I have anything to say about it." Lillian looked up, alarmed. "Michael, don't let this affect your reputation. You've worked so hard." Michael stepped closer, his voice gentler now, but no less powerful. "Mom, Dad, this isn't about my reputation. This is about yours. About every parent who spent a lifetime doing things the right way, and still being told they don't belong." He paused, then added with a fierceness they hadn't seen in years. This won't go unanswered. I promise you. James leaned back in his chair, eyes glistening. For a moment, he saw not the corporate mogul Michael had become, but the little boy who once told him, "One day, I'll buy you a car so nice, it makes the neighbors faint." That little boy had grown into a man who had built empires, and now, he was standing at the edge of something greater, not just power, but purpose. That night, the three of them sat in the living room without a TV, without music, just soft light, and quiet hearts processing the wound. Michael sat between them. He didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. He was already planning, and in his silence, there was something unmistakable. The calm before a storm. The grandfather clock in Michael's office ticked steadily, each second thudding like a drumbeat, echoing the fury in his chest. It was past midnight. The rest of the mansion was asleep, its glowing wood holding generations of love and laughter. But inside Michael's office, something darker stirred, something focused, something cold. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, his tall frame silhouetted by the faint city lights pouring in through the massive windows. Behind him, the shelves were lined with awards, magazine covers, and framed certificates from Wharton and Harvard, symbols of power, achievement. But tonight, they meant nothing, because none of those plaques could protect the two people he loved most from what they had endured. His parents had walked into a dealership to dream, and walked out feeling unworthy. Michael leaned forward slowly, steepling his fingers under his chin, eyes locked on nothing and everything. He could still hear his mother's voice. "They said we didn't belong there, that people like us can't afford it." And his father, ever the calm voice of reason, had tried to brush it off, but the pain had cracked through anyway. Michael had built his life fighting silently against the very stereotypes that nearly broke his parents today, and now they had touched what should have been untouchable. Enough. With deliberate movement, he reached for his phone. His assistant picked up within 2 rings, despite the late hour. "Good evening, Mr. Holloway," came the smooth, groggy voice. "Is everything okay?" Michael's tone was calm, calculated, deadly precise. "I need 2 Rolls-Royce boat tails delivered to the dealership on Granville Avenue tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." There was a short pause. "Both Rolls-Royce boat tails, each worth over $28 million. "Yes, sir," his assistant said quickly, now fully alert. "Do you want them branded or?" "I want them polished to perfection, parked outside that glass showroom like royalty. I want the world to stop when they arrive. I want everyone inside that dealership to witness it. Employees, customers, management." His voice grew quieter, but somehow heavier. "This isn't a display of wealth. This is a reminder." Another pause. "Yes, sir," his assistant responded. "Should I have your security or PR?" Michael cut in, his tone ice. "At 9 a.m., I will arrive with my parents. Nothing more, nothing less. No cameras, no interviews." A final pause. "But let everyone remember." The call ended. Michael placed the phone down gently. The soft click of it meeting the mahogany desk felt like a gun being holstered. Then he stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the city sparkled like it always did. Billions of lights, live stories. But tonight, the lights seemed to flicker with a new weight. A truth he knew too well. In this world, dignity wasn't always given freely. Sometimes, it had to be reclaimed, boldly, loudly, without apology. Michael sat back down at his desk, and opened an old leather drawer, pulling out a photograph. His parents, younger, laughing, holding little Michael between them. No suits, no money, just joy. He stared at the photo, emotion creeping up his throat like fire. They had sacrificed everything for him, and all they had asked for in return was to be treated like humans. But today, in a showroom full of glass and shine, they had been reduced to shadows. Michael tapped the frame of the photo once with his thumb. Not anymore. Somewhere across the city, the man who had started it all, John Williams, the arrogant sales associate, was lounging in his high-rise apartment, sipping from a glass of expensive wine. He laughed as he recounted the day to a friend on the phone. "Oh, you should have seen their faces," he said smugly. "Old couple in thrift store outfits trying to buy a car worth more than their house. I told them, wrong place, folks. They left like kicked puppies." He laughed again, feet propped on a leather ottoman. "But get this," he added, swirling the wine. "Some little Latina girl tried to pull a savior act afterward. Brought them back in, let them sit in one of the cars. Cute, right?" There was a beat on the other end of the call. "You think they'll complain?" his friend asked, cautious. John shrugged. "Please, who's gonna believe them? They didn't even raise their voice." He laughed again, unaware that his name would be spoken tomorrow in a tone he had never heard before. A tone of judgment, of consequence. Back at Michael's home, the clock struck 1 a.m. He hadn't moved, still seated, still silent. But inside the storm had formed, not one of chaos, not one of vengeance, a storm of clarity. A man like Michael didn't throw fists. He threw messages, louder than punches, heavier than noise. Down the hall, James peeked into the office quietly, seeing only the glow of Michael's desk lamp and his son's sharp silhouette. He was about to say something, but stopped. He saw something in Michael's eyes that stopped him cold.
It was the look of a son who had drawn a line no one would be allowed to cross again. And in that moment, the storm was no longer brewing. It was already in motion. Tomorrow morning, justice would arrive, not with rage, but on 4 wheels wrapped in luxury and driven by love. The sun rose slow and golden, painting the city in soft fire. Morning fog still clung to the sidewalks, like a secret not yet told. But on Granville Avenue, something unusual stirred outside the luxury dealership. 2 vehicles, midnight black, gleaming with dew, moved through the street, like royalty, refusing to be rushed. Not 1, but 2 Rolls-Royce boat tails, each worth more than the entire block. Rare, custom, commanding, they purred to a stop, directly in front of the dealership's towering glass windows, sunlight bending around them, like they were forged from shadow and light. Inside the showroom, the noise dropped to a whisper. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Fingers froze on keyboards. Even the espresso machine hissed into silence. Behind the glass, every head turned. From the front desk, John Williams leaned forward, squinting. "Who the hell?" he muttered, his voice trailing off as the doors to the first rolls opened. The hush fell so thick it could be felt. Out stepped Michael Holloway, dressed not in loud logos or designer arrogance, but in an elegantly tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. A quiet storm in human form. He stood tall, the sharp angles of his face calm but unreadable. And then from the second Rolls-Royce stepped out James and Lillian, still in the same modest clothes as the day before, still gentle in posture, still quiet in presence. But this time, something was different. This time, the world looked up. Inside, jaws dropped. People whispered, "Isn't that the couple from yesterday? Oh my God," they came back. But they hadn't just come back. They had returned with truth, with dignity, and with a son who had turned pain into a weapon of grace. Michael walked toward the glass doors, his parents beside him, steps slow and deliberate, like music no one dared interrupt. Inside, John Williams' face lost all color. He stood frozen, lips parted, unable to process what he was seeing. It wasn't just that the couple had returned, it was who they were. The doors slid open. The temperature in the room didn't change, but the atmosphere cracked like glass under pressure. Michael stepped in first. All eyes locked on him, some curious, some confused, others burning with shame. He scanned the room with calm precision, pausing, just briefly, on John's pale face. Behind him, James and Lillian followed with quiet strength. They did not hang their heads this time. They did not lower their gaze. They belonged, and everyone knew it. Emily Torres, standing near a display desk, instinctively straightened her spine. Her heart thudded as she watched the scene unfold. The couple she had once comforted, now walking through the very space that had tried to erase them. Michael stopped in the center of the showroom. The silence felt alive. Then he spoke, voice low, clear, and echoing with intent. "I'm here to remind you of something you forgot." Eyes widened. Customers leaned in. Employees stopped pretending to be busy. "You forgot that dignity doesn't wear a price tag, that class isn't stitched into suits or sewn into skin, and that no one has the right to decide someone's worth based on the clothes they wear or the color they were born with." Every syllable fell like a hammer, wrapped in velvet. John swallowed hard, backing slightly toward a desk. Michael's gaze never left him. "Yesterday, my parents were treated with mockery, with contempt, and with prejudice, not because they were rude, not because they did anything wrong, but because someone here looked at their skin and their shoes and decided they didn't matter." The ripple of discomfort spread like ink through water. Michael's tone stayed level, but his presence grew larger. "That someone," he said, eyes narrowing, "will be held accountable, not just by us, but by everyone watching." At that moment, the dealership manager, a nervous man in his 50s, stepped out from his glass office, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Holloway, we had no idea," he stammered. Michael turned slightly. "I'd like to review the security footage from yesterday's incident. I believe it's important. The truth is made visible to everyone." The manager hesitated, then nodded quickly. Yes, of course." Right away, he disappeared into his office. The tension in the room was electric. Employees exchanged glances. Some bit their lips. Others looked down, already regretting the laughter they'd shared too easily just yesterday. A few minutes later, the manager returned, holding a tablet. He walked to the center of the room and connected it to the display screen near the main desk. And then, the footage began to play. There it was, in full color, full sound. James and Lillian, entering, humble and kind. John's voice, mocking, sarcastic, cruel. The laughter, the whispers, the contempt. No one could look away. When the video ended, the room stood in stunned silence. Even John, frozen like a man caught in a nightmare, couldn't speak. His throat clicked as he tried. Michael turned toward the manager, who looked pale and deeply unsettled. The manager's voice was heavy, firm. "After reviewing the footage and confirming the complaint, I can say without hesitation that sales associate John Williams acted in clear violation of our professional ethics and human values. Effective immediately. He is terminated." John flinched. "Wait, But no one listened. No one defended him. Even the colleagues who had laughed before now took a step back. Michael stepped forward, his gaze fixed. "You didn't just insult my parents. You insulted every decent human being who's ever been told they're not enough." John lowered his head. No arrogance left, no smile, just silence. And in that moment, his downfall was complete, not because of rage, but because of undeniable truth. As John exited through the same doors James and Lillian had left through yesterday, it wasn't just his job he lost, it was his illusion that privilege could protect him from consequence. And behind him, Michael stood tall, a son who had turned quiet heartbreak into public reckoning. He then turned to his parents, placing a gentle hand on his mother's back. "You okay?" Lillian nodded slowly, her eyes wet, not with pain, but with relief. James looked at his son, pride swelling in his chest. Michael looked around the silent room once more. Let today be remembered, not because someone was fired, but because truth was finally heard. And with that, he walked toward the very car his parents had admired yesterday, the same car they had been told wasn't for people like them. Tomorrow, the dealership would continue its business, but it would never be the same, because today, dignity rolled in on 4 wheels. The dealership stood still. John Williams had walked out, not just stripped of his title, but of the false power he'd once wrapped around himself like armor.
His departure wasn't loud, it was silent, and that silence was deafening. But even as the doors hissed shut behind him, the tension in the room didn't lift, it shifted. Now every eye in the dealership turned toward Michael Holloway, the man who had brought both thunder and light, and beside him stood James and Lillian, no longer the targets of mockery, but pillars of grace, who had weathered humiliation with silent strength. Michael looked around the room, pausing on the faces of employees who just a day ago had laughed. Some looked away in shame, others stared, eyes heavy with remorse. But Michael wasn't done yet. His voice broke the silence, not sharp now, but resonant, like a deep cello note that refused to fade. When we ignore disrespect, we allow it to grow. When we stay silent in the face of cruelty, we give it permission to thrive. He turned slowly, scanning every corner of the room. But when we stand up, when we call it out, we remind the world that kindness is not weakness, that dignity is not negotiable. No one moved. And then he turned towards someone specific, a woman standing near the far side of the room, frozen in place, eyes wide. Emily Torres. Her breath caught when his gaze landed on her, not harshly, but with a warmth that almost made her knees tremble. Michael took a few steps forward. There was one voice yesterday that chose compassion when it was easier to stay silent. Emily's hands trembled at her sides. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Michael stopped a few feet from her. "Emily Torres," he said, his voice now softer, almost reverent. "You didn't know who my parents were. You didn't treat them kindly because of status or wealth. You did it because it was right." Emily blinked, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She tried to speak. I couldn't let them leave feeling like that. I saw their eyes. I saw the pain." Michael stepped closer. "And you were the only one who saw them as human, not as charity, not as a problem, just as people." The room was utterly still, and then Michael turned toward the dealership manager, who stood nearby, breath caught in his throat. Michael's voice rose slightly, still calm, still commanding. "I've decided to purchase the Rolls-Royce my parents admired yesterday." Gasps rippled through the room. The manager's jaw dropped. "And I want the full commission from that sale to go directly to Emily Torres." The room exploded with murmurs. Some gasped aloud, a few clapped instinctively, before stopping, unsure of the moment. Emily staggered a step back, her mouth parted. "Wait, what? No, sir, I can't. I didn't do it for anything like that." Michael smiled, not just with his lips, but with a quiet, glowing warmth. "Exactly, and that's why you deserve it." He looked her in the eyes, his voice rich with sincerity. "The world needs more Emilys. People who act with courage when it's inconvenient, who stand up for dignity without knowing there's a reward. You didn't just change my parents' experience. You reminded me that goodness still exists, and that matters more than any car." Emily wiped her cheeks, hands shaking. She could barely breathe. "I thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. I couldn't watch it happen. I couldn't not care." Michael nodded. "That's the rarest kind of strength." The dealership manager cleared his throat, stepping forward with wide eyes. "I agree completely with Mr. Holloway," he said, still visibly shaken. "Effective immediately. I would like to promote Emily Torres to the position of senior sales manager." Another wave of gasps. Emily stared at him, stunned. "Sir, this is too much." But the manager held up a hand, his voice gentler than before. "You've earned it, Emily. You didn't just sell kindness, you lived it, and you reminded all of us of who we're supposed to be." This time, applause filled the room, real applause. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. Some clapped quietly, others enthusiastically. Even those who had once judged her now looked at her with genuine admiration. Emily covered her mouth with both hands. The tears came freely now. Michael extended his hand toward her. She took it, and in that shake was something rare, mutual respect, not based on titles or transactions, but on something deeper, shared humanity. James and Lillian stood beside them now, watching the young woman who had restored their faith when the world tried to break it. Lillian gently reached out, placing a hand on Emily's arm. "Thank you, dear," she said softly, eyes moist. "You didn't just sell us a car, you gave us a reason to believe again." James nodded. "People forget how far a little kindness can go, but we never will." And in that glowing moment, something shifted. It wasn't about Rolls-Royces anymore, not about positions or status. It was about character. It was about the truth that had unfolded here. One act of cruelty exposed, and another of kindness magnified. And the lesson was clear, for all to see. In a world obsessed with surface, it's what's underneath that matters most. As the applause faded, and the atmosphere settled, Michael walked back toward the door with his parents. But before stepping out, he paused, turning one final time to let this moment live on here, not as a scandal, but as a seed, a reminder that no matter who walks through those doors, they carry something greater than money or appearance. They carry dignity, and it is your job to protect it. He turned, gently guiding his mother out with one hand. His father followed, strong and steady, and the three of them walked out, not in vengeance, not in arrogance, but in victory, quiet, poised, whole. The dealership's glass doors whispered shut behind them, sealing the echoes of applause. Stunned silence, and justice restored. Outside, the morning sun had risen fully now, spilling golden light across the sidewalk, washing over James, Lillian, and Michael as they stood for a moment, just breathing. The air smelled fresher, not because the city had changed, but because something inside them had. James turned to look at the two Rolls-Royce boat tails, still parked like sentinels before the dealership. Their surfaces caught the light like silk, like the very sky was applauding their presence. But none of them reached for the keys just yet, because this moment wasn't about cars. It was about the journey it had taken to stand here again, this time not as strangers in a foreign room, but as dignified souls who had refused to disappear quietly. Lillian looked up at Michael, her eyes shimmering. "I feel like I can breathe again," she whispered, "like we unzipped something off our backs." Michael smiled gently, brushing a hand down her arm. "That wasn't just a moment, Mom. That was a message." And everyone heard it. James, standing tall beside them, closed his eyes for a second. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The peace on his face said enough. The ache he had carried in his shoulders since yesterday, the shame that had hunched his back, aged his spirit, it was gone. And in its place was quiet pride. From inside the glass, the employees watched. They weren't just watching customers anymore. They were watching change walk away. Some of them lowered their heads, replaying the scene in their minds. Others stared openly, their expressions a mix of shame and awe. Because it wasn't just John who had been exposed, it was all of them. Their silence, their snickers, their complicity. But in the wake of that exposure, a shift had occurred, one that wouldn't be forgotten when the showroom lights dimmed tonight. Back outside, Emily Torres stepped through the dealership doors, and stood just behind them, her figure framed by sunlight and glass. She didn't call out, she simply watched. Michael turned, catching her gaze. He gave her a single nod, a wordless thank you, not as a buyer, not even as a CEO, as a human being. Emily smiled back, and in that smile lived gratitude, respect, and something deeper, recognition of the truth they had all been reminded of. What you do when no one expects you to care is the truest measure of who you are. James exhaled, taking Lillian's hand into his own, his voice soft. "You ready to go home?" Lillian looked around, not at the cars, not at the street, but at the people still watching from behind the glass. And then she said, "I think we already are home, right here." She touched her chest. "In this moment, for the first time in a long time, I feel seen." Michael opened the rear door of one of the Rolls-Royces, helping his mother into the seat with care, the same way she had once buckled him into school buses and family vans. He did it without show, just love, threaded through his fingertips. Then he helped his father in beside her. As he rounded the front to take the driver's seat, Michael paused. He looked back at the dealership, its clean glass, its towering structure, its air of luxury, and he smiled, not in victory, but in closure. Because this wasn't revenge, this was restoration. He started the engine. The purr was smooth, almost spiritual. As the car began to glide forward, the second Rolls-Royce followed behind, driven by a member of his team, silent as a shadow. The cars moved together like twin reflections of a statement that didn't need to be repeated, only remembered. And behind them, something far more permanent than tire marks was left behind. Inside the dealership, the silence continued, not the awkward, stifling silence from the day before. This was different. This was a silence of self-reflection, the kind that stays with you, the kind that follows you home. Emily stood by the window long after the cars disappeared from view. Behind her, the staff had returned to their desks, but no one had returned to who they were yesterday. The laughter was quieter, the gazes softer, the judgments paused, because a line had been drawn in that dealership, one that reminded everyone, appearances are not the truth, status is not value, and silence in the face of wrong is just another form of wrong. Back inside her office, Emily sat at her desk for the first time as a senior manager. But she didn't open her computer. She pulled out a sticky note and wrote just one sentence. "Let kindness be the loudest thing I wear." She placed it on her monitor, not as a reminder, but as a vow. Later that afternoon, customers still came, cars were still admired, business resumed, but the energy was different. Employees caught themselves before they judged. They paused before they scoffed, because they would all remember the day the quiet couple walked out with more than cars. They had walked out with every pair of eyes following them, and every heart thinking, "I want to be better than I was yesterday." And as the last ray of sun slid across the marble floor, someone whispered what everyone else was thinking. That wasn't just a sale. That was a story we'll never forget. The days that followed were quiet, but not ordinary, not anymore. The dealership on Granville Avenue returned to business as usual. Cars shined, doors opened, clients strolled in with designer bags and polished shoes. But beneath the glass and leather glamour, something had shifted. Every employee walked a little slower, looked a little closer, spoke a little softer, because the echoes of what had happened just days before were still alive in the wall. John Williams' desk remained empty, cleared out the same evening of his dismissal. But his absence was more than physical. It was a vacancy of arrogance, a removed thorn from the dealership's quiet wound. More importantly, a new presence had taken root. Her name, Emily Torres. But now, her nameplate read, Senior Sales Manager. And to many inside the dealership, she became more than a colleague. She became a compass. Within the dealership under Emily's new leadership, changes began immediately, not loud, but real. She implemented empathy training, not the kind HR emails about once a year. Real, face-to-face workshops, conversations. Every week, she hosted a 10-minute human moment with her team, where someone could share a story, a memory, or even a mistake they had learned from. At first some rolled their eyes, but within weeks, something began to crack open. People started to listen, to connect, to care. And one afternoon, a junior associate named Rachel admitted, voice trembling, that she had once laughed along when John mocked customers who didn't look the part. "I thought I was just going with the flow," she said, "but now I realize silence is a choice too." No one judged her. They just nodded, because they understood now. Complicity isn't always loud. Sometimes it just looks like comfort. Online, a story shared around the world. The moment Michael, James, and Lillian stepped into that dealership, it was just a powerful personal reckoning. But the security footage, now public with the Holloway family's permission, struck a global nerve. A local news station aired the story, then a national one. Then, the internet took over. Billionaire son returns to dealership that humiliated his parents, and teaches a lesson no one will forget. A clip of the confrontation, Michael's calm voice echoing, "You forgot that dignity doesn't wear a price tag," hit 13 million views in 2 days. Hashtags like #people like us, #dignity first, and #silent power began trending. And something rare happened online. People didn't just consume the story, they connected with it, they carried it. Strangers began sharing their own experiences. Elderly couple, single moms, immigrants, teenagers, all opening up about times they'd been underestimated, dismissed or humiliated, based on how they looked. It wasn't just a story anymore, it had become a mirror, and suddenly, everyone was looking into it. Emily's inbox. She started receiving messages from people she didn't know, from cities she'd never visited, from countries she'd only seen in documentaries. You reminded me what kindness looks like in the real world. Thank you. I work in retail. I'm embarrassed to admit I've judged people, but not anymore. You showed my daughter what courage looks like in a woman. One message made her cry at her desk. I'm 76 years old. I've been turned away from stores my whole life because of how I look, but after seeing you, for the first time in decades, I feel like I exist. Emily printed that message and tucked it inside her wallet. She carried it everywhere, next to her ID. At home, healing that matters. Back in the Holloway home, peace had returned, but it wasn't the kind that forgets. It was the kind that remembers, without pain. James sat by the garden most mornings now, sipping his coffee slowly, watching the sunlight pass through the trees, and when neighbors stopped by, asking about the video, he didn't shy away. He just smiled, calm and grounded. Yeah, he'd say, that was us. That was our moment. Lillian started keeping a journal again, not just of recipes or birthdays, but of memories, thoughts, feelings. She wrote about her mother's prayers, the hurt of being followed in stores, the strength it took not to shrink, and one page read, my son didn't just buy us a car, he gave us back our voice. Michael, a bigger vision, the CEO, who once ruled boardrooms, now had a new fire. Michael Holloway didn't stop after that day. He started a scholarship fund in his parents' names, the James and Lillian Holloway Fund for Dignity in Leadership. It provided financial support for Black and brown youth pursuing careers in business, design, and entrepreneurship, students who might be judged not by their grades, but by their zip code or skin. And every year, he gave a speech at the award ceremony. He never mentioned his companies. He just said this: don't just make profit, make change, because power without compassion is just noise. Legacy, a permanent mark. At the Granville dealership, a new plaque was installed near the entrance, just beside the door, where James and Lillian had once been humiliated, and where they had later stood triumphant. It read, this place honors dignity. All are welcome, all are worthy. We remember the day that reminded us why. Every customer passed it. Some stopped, some cried, some smiled, because they knew the story, and because now they were part of it. And so, the ripples continued, because when one person stands up, others rise. When one woman speaks up, others find their voice. When one couple refuses to shrink, an entire world learns to expand. And it all began with one moment, one door, one quiet couple, and the simple, eternal truth: dignity is never optional. It's the one luxury we all deserve.